Thank you very much, our Chairperson, the Minister of Djibouti, Honorable Ministers responsible for gender, our sister from Ethiopia, Madam Diop, Madam Leila, our Nobel laureate, our sister Geraldine, our sister there, S2, President of PAO, our progressive brother, Lebuhan, who is representing UND, Director of UNDP, GMAC members, our colleagues, commissioners who are here, AU staff. I want to also say all protocol observed, because I'm sure I've missed somebody. But I want to start by telling you a story about all protocol observed. I was in a meeting recently, and the program director was running out of time, and he said, please don't acknowledge anyone, just say all protocol observed. But of course, he says that there was a man who was told to say all protocol observed, but when he was supposed to speak, he forgot. And he was trying to think, what did they say I must say? And eventually he said, all potholes covered. So I hope I've covered all potholes. I want to start by welcoming you once more, adding my voice to the previous speakers, to the African Union headquarters, which is your headquarters. And of course, to welcome you specifically to this hall, which has now been named after our icon, the late President Nelson Mandela. And it's important to welcome you at this time because we are actually preparing for the summit. So this meeting, whatever you decide, will have to flow into the summit and the summit decisions. But before I speak, let me wish you all a happy new year, because I've not seen you in this year, but also wish you a happy year on women. I won't mention the whole theme, but it's about us this year. So I hope everything will go well this year and we will build an unstoppable momentum towards the emancipation of women. Our gathering here is women from our continental organizations and RECs, from government, civil society, from international organizations and partners from different generations. We are here, different generations. I guess the youngest we have is, what, 17 years old, who is in this hall. So from 17 years old to whatever age some of us are, we are a truly intergenerational meeting, which is also very important to be intergenerational. And of course, the strength that we have is our ability to unite around a common goal. A goal that the women's movement, since time immemorial, and I think it's important to remind ourselves that this struggle is not new. It's a struggle that has been there since time immemorial. And I want to quote one of the early women's movement people, name is Emmeline Pankhurst, who said in 1913, none of us were here, in 1913 she said, I quote, "We are women fighting for a great idea, that we wish the betterment of the human race, and that we believe this betterment is coming through the emancipation and uplifting of women," close quote. I think this summarizes the reasons why women's emancipation is so critical, not only as our human right and the right to reach our full potential, but also as the reason for economic development, for equity, for prosperity, for peace. If women are emancipated and uplifted, the human race gets better. So it's not just about ourselves, it's about the human race as a whole. And as African women, we've come a long way. Today we're able to stand here on the shoulders of our founding mothers, particularly the founding mothers of the Pan-African movement, who fought against slavery, colonialism, apartheid, and also formed the Pan-African Women's Organization in 1962. And I always like to remind ourselves that the women formed the Pan-African Women's Organization in 1962, before the OAU existed. But as women today, we have taken the baton from those women and their organizations and the leagues and activists across the continent, who in their national and local movements ensured that women's rights find a place in the development of post-independent Africa. We built on the foundations of African women who presented us in all the World Women's Conferences, the last one having been in Beijing in 1995, and came back with a global plan of action for the emancipation and upliftment of women. And I'm sure in this room are gathered many of the generations of women that ensured that Africa has a comprehensive policy framework and machinery on gender equality, the Maputo Protocol, the Solemn Declaration, the African Decade of Women at continental and regional and national levels. And I also see some brothers who are here with us, and I hope they are here because they believe in the cause of the emancipation of women. Because it's important never to think that we can emancipate women on our own. We have to work with progressive men who understand and believe in the cause of equality. So, it is our unity in action, tireless campaigning, and adoption of gender parity principles of the African Union, and that sees ever-increasing representation women in public life. It is a drive that accounts for progress on maternal and child mortality, on women's reproductive rights, in gender parity in education, and more generally for the social and economic upliftment of women. Brothers and sisters, more sisters, because there are more here, but brothers as well. 2015 as the Africa Year of Women and celebration of Beijing Plus 20 represents an opportunity for us to take our struggle for women's empowerment and gender equality to a higher level. And of course, the reason we decided that we should have this particular theme for the year was that we felt that it was important right at the onset of Agenda 2063 to assert the position of women in that agenda. Because many a times policies are made, decisions are taken, and women come as an add-on because they were either forgotten or not acknowledged, and therefore their issues are never totally integrated. And that's why we struggle about mainstreaming, because there are policies that are already in place that do not take into account women's empowerment. So we think women's empowerment is so important that as we develop the first 10-year plan, women's issues must be completely and totally integrated in that plan. And I was very excited to hear what UNDP is doing, and I hope that we can really work closer together on all those issues. And of course, before we go any further, it's very important that we review progress, maybe for the last 20 years, and also look at setbacks, because it's important to look at setbacks, to look at risks, so that we can try and avoid them going forward. But of course, we also need to review the Millennium Development Goals, since it is the end of those goals. And we are now looking at the post-2015 agenda. And also to take stock of our Women's Decade. What have we done? We are midpoint that decade. What progress have we made, if any? And how are we going to move forward in the next 5 years towards the end of the decade? So it's very important. And also 2015 is really a very important year globally. It's looking at the post-2015 agenda. It's looking at climate change, that we are expecting some agreements in the climate change issues in Paris this year. It's Beijing Plus 20. But of course, we're also faced with lots of new threats and challenges at the same time. But for us, we must ensure through our actions that 2015 is a watershed for African women. Our theme identifies a number of areas critical towards achieving this watershed for women's empowerment and development, including, I will just mention a few, because a lot of speakers have talked about a whole range of areas. So I will just mention a few. Last year, it was the year of agriculture, and this type of meeting last year did talk a lot about women in agriculture. So now, having had the year of agriculture, what tangible things are we going to do moving forward? Last year, the women said they want modern technology in farming. They are tired of the farming methods that they have, the hand hoe that breaks their back. They said they want to have access to land. they said that they want access to capital, and therefore they want to improve their productivity. They want to go into agro-processing and agribusiness. And of course they want the archaic hand hoe in the museum. That's what they said. That's what we said last year about the year of agriculture and women. Now, before we move to the next theme, what are we going to do about that? How many tractors are we going to buy for women so that they can stop breaking their backs with the hand hoe? This question must be asked to us nationally. As national governments, what are we going to do towards that? Regional organizations, UNDP, how many tractors are you going to buy us? 1,000? 1,000? We need them. We can't make declarations here about hand hoes breaking our back and nothing happens after that. As ministers, what are we doing about that? AU, what are we going to do about that? That is what we must also discuss in this session. Because if we don't, we'll just say, oh, it was the year of agriculture, it's past. We're now in another year. We have to address those things. In the war-torn areas, maybe peace and security can pitch in as well and assist women with implements to make farming easier. So, I hope at the end of this meeting, all of us in our different formations, business people, I see my sister there, the doctor there from Egypt. Business people, what are we going to do to get women indeed to be able to put the hoe in the museum? Because speeches and speeches that we make, if we don't follow them with action, are not going to work. So, that's the first issue I want to raise. I hope we can share best practice in terms of land policy here. I know, if I'm not mistaken, here in Ethiopia, they have a progressive land policy. Women own land, and if land belongs to the family, it's both the man and the woman who owns the land. It's not just the man. So those kind of things we need to share and see if we can go back and improve our policies back home. As ministers, for instance, how do we work with the ministers of agriculture, of finance, with parliamentarians to ensure that we do give women access to land? And some countries have already done it, so we can look at how they've done it and go back and do the same in our own countries. Women said they want access to capital. We are thinking that maybe during this year, as part of this year's theme, we must have a round table with the financial institutions, banks and other financial institutions, to say, how do we begin to ensure that women do have access to capital, and also youth, because youth also have the same problem. So maybe we can work together, UNDP, gender, women, stakeholders to have this round table and say to financial institutions, as women, we want to have this. In Agenda 2063, we say at least 30% of the finances that go to agriculture must go to women. And how are we going to ensure that the banks, we don't own the banks, but we do put our money in those banks. And so we should be able to say things to them that will improve our situation. So that's a campaign that we need to wage this year, based on what we agreed on last year. And of course, women must also have access to technology in agriculture. They must be able to begin to move away just from producing, but also to processing. So I hope we'll come up with a very clear program that we can then sell to governments, to business, to everybody, to partners on this matter of agriculture. We talk about gender representation. I always say we sometimes underestimate our power as women. And our power is in unity and numbers. And elections are about numbers. If women unite to say, even if we belong to different political parties, but we want enough women in parliament, we should be able to do that as women, championed by our ministers of gender. To say the electoral law in every country must begin to address this matter of having enough women in parliament. At the moment, we don't even have a quota of public representatives in all our parliaments. A lot of them still have less than a quota. But we are working towards 50. So we must make progress. And we must unite across political lines where we have a common interest as women and fight for that right. Because it's not a favor. And we must work with progressive men in doing this. But the progressive men, I'm saying progressive men because progressive men will understand that this is not a favor they are doing us. It's a right, and it's the right thing to do. Others may think, oh, it's a favor, and you must pay me back in one way or another. And that's not good enough. So we must drive having women in parliament, in municipalities, in the executive at national level. Lebogang talked about women in the judiciary. Women in the judiciary are important for us because we can never be able to deal with gender violence, whether it's domestic or in conflict or just part of general crime, if we don't have the right people in the judiciary. We once took a case to a court, a lower court magistrate, of women who had been trafficked from another country under the guise that they were going to come and be given employment. But they were put in these nightclubs where they don't only are expected to dance, but they are also expected to give sexual services to the clients who come there. So we took this case to court. And the first thing the magistrate said, ooh, I've never seen so many beautiful women in my life. in court. So how is he different from the ones who are using these women for service if all he sees is beautiful women? And so why are you bringing them here if, you know? And of course we lost that case because the magistrate didn't see the point. In fact, I think after that he probably wanted to go to the same place where these women came from. So it's very important that we have a critical mass of women in the judiciary, whilst we also try and work with the progressive men in the judiciary. It's also very important to have a critical mass of women in our institutions of learning, schools, high schools, universities. Because it's important for our young girls to see women leading those institutions and working in those institutions. So it's not just about being in parliament, but it's across the spectrum. In business, you know, if we are organized, we can really work with business and we can say how many of our households here buy Coca-Cola, for instance. Many, I'm sure. If I had to say those who don't buy Coca-Cola must raise their hands, there'll be very few, if any. But have we engaged Coca-Cola around women's issues? Because if women in the household stop buying it, their business will stop. Or any product for that matter. To say, okay, how many women are you employing? How many women are part of the ownership, of the management, and so on? But we don't. But we have the power as consumers to also engage them. But we also engage our governments, everyone, to nurture women entrepreneurs because we need them. We need young women to be in science, maths, engineering, technology, innovation, because even in their innovation, they will be informed by their life experience, and they will know what things to innovate that will help women and that will help families. Of course, I've already discussed about financial institutions, but financial institutions, we must also look at the budgeting in government, and I hope UNDP indeed is working to make sure that women are empowered, they have the capacity when they are in government to understand budgets, to make sure that they are able to interrogate the budgets in a way that they can see where their issues fit in the budget. Because if we don't ensure that the budgets of government address both men and women issues, we will not get very far. Now we have our Commissioner here of Peace and Security. I will not say a lot because tomorrow it's dedicated on peace and security. But again, our heads of state took a decision that they want to silence the guns by 2020. But if they are going to silence the guns by 2020, the work must begin now. So we need to engage and see what work is taking place to make sure that the guns are silenced. Because silencing the guns is not about when there's a conflict, there's a gun this side and a gun that side. Yes, that may be necessary in the short term, but it's very important to look at everything, to look at management of diversity. Because if people feel that they are in the margins of society, if there is intolerance in the society, whether it's religious, ethnic, or whatever, if people don't feel secure and included and part of society, economically, politically, in the democracy, they will then fall foul of getting to be recruited by extremists, by people with extreme views. So it's very important to make sure that we remove the base of extremists, that our societies feel there is no need to go the extremist route because they are part of what is happening in the country, in the economy, in government, in land distribution, in everything. So that's part of silencing work, the work that needs to be done towards silencing the guns. Of course, in a women's meeting, we have to talk about ourselves at a younger age, about girls. Our girls should have the same rights and opportunities as boys. The girls must be at school, and they must be kept at school as long as they need to be. They should be at school, go to high school, go to tertiary institutions, and they must be protected by law against child marriages. It is indeed an indictment on all of us, that there are girls that cannot be protected, that find themselves being married off when they are girls, when they are children. And of course, it's not only child marriages, it's teenage pregnancies, it's violence against these women, kidnapping. We must never forget and stop the campaign to bring the girls back who were kidnapped from school. What kind of people take girls from school? And we must prevent our children, our girls, being used as spoils of war. So we have to do more to empower young women and men who are our most precious resource through education, training and skills, and through their participation in shaping the future of our countries, of our continent, of the world. So this is very important, because otherwise everything we do, if we cannot protect our girls, it will go to nothing. Of course, their health. Madam Diop mentioned Ebola. Ebola has exposed all of us how unprepared, how our health services are unprepared for these kind of epidemics. But having said that, I'm glad that many people, many countries have contributed towards fighting Ebola. It has given us an opportunity to form partnerships with, not only with governments, but with business, with individuals. And I also want to just say to you, we now have almost 1,000 health workers who who are working in these three countries, Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone, who are coming from the continent. And we must really give honor to those young men and women who have decided they are going to be on the line in defense of their brothers and sisters in these three countries. We must also thank the countries that have given us health workers, because there are two types. There are those who have volunteered individually, but there are those who have also volunteered, but their governments are also supporting them. So we thank everybody who has participated in making sure that we are able to respond to this epidemic. The business sector, and I also want to just talk in particular about the cell phone network operators who have really stepped up to the plate and agreed to come together and to help us have this SMS campaign where you and me can donate by sending an SMS. And the popular number for sending this SMS is 7979. But in a few countries, they are using a different number. So how many of us have been able to do that? I think we should donate something. It differs from country to country. In South Africa, if you send that SMS, you donate 10 rands, which is just under $1. But that will go a long way in supporting the health workers who are on the field, because we have to keep them until those three countries are Ebola free. We have to make sure they eat, their families are taken care of, they have proper accommodation, transport, they have proper equipment when they work. So please, when you go back, spread the word. I know in Chad they use a different number, 6969. In Senegal they use 1919. In South Africa they use 40797. But in most of the countries they use 7979. So we also want to thank the individuals who are donating towards Ebola, because they are taking part in this fight against Ebola. Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, we therefore urge governments represented here by gender ministers, the REX, African women's NGOs, CSOs, our partners, to be even more active in the realization of the theme of this year. But as women, we are known for being practical. We are not known for being theoretical and just theory after theory. We are known to being practical. So what we expect here would be a practical, action-orientated year for women. And it is our collective responsibility to truly make this year about women's development and empowerment in all spheres. Regions and countries should have their own concrete actions and plans for this year, to be guided by the AUC's theme document, to be enriched through these consultations. And let me just conclude with the words of Gerda Lerner, one of the founders of the field of women's history, when she said, I quote, "It took 72 years of unrelenting, unbroken, organizing grassroots efforts to get women's suffrage. It took 113 years to get rid of child labor by law. Thankfully, we live in an era of fast-moving change. I've closed that quote. So we cannot wait for 113 years. We cannot wait for 72 years for these things to happen. We therefore want to build a non-sexist Africa in less than 50 years. We want a prosperous and inclusive Africa in less than 50 years. We want to eradicate poverty, which has a feminine face anyway, disease and hunger in less than 50 years. Let us therefore start this journey towards Agenda 2063 and start building the Africa we want. Thank you. Asante sana.